Greetings, it is time for my monthly inflation update, and as always with my monthly inflation update, I go to my familiar matrix where I say that there are three holistic, comprehensive, non-volatile, because they're longer term, measurements of inflation, and all three of these have to be above 3% before I say inflation is structurally high, and inflation too far below 3% is also a negative because we are veering too close to deflation. Deflation is much worse than moderately high inflation, as I explain in this tag in this upper right hand corner up here. So the 10-year compound annual growth rate of the US CPI, the 10-year compound annual growth rate of the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, and the 10-year US Treasury yield. All three of these have to be above 3% before I say inflation is structurally high. And again, 3% would be optimal. It's not some big red line of a speed limit. 3% would be optimal. 3.1% would be very, very slightly above optimal. But proportionality above 3% for all three is what would be high inflation if that were to happen, and that has not happened in a very, very long time. So let's go to the 10-year US Treasury yield first. 10-year US Treasury yield, 4.213%. If I take the 5-year chart, you can see it's risen, but it can't get really too far above this 4% threshold, although this is considerably above 3%. So this is 4.213%. It's not so much a measurement of past inflation, but it does affect mortgage prices and loan payments for any other type of loan as well, including car loans and student loans. Now we go to the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index. Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, 10-year compound annual growth rate is still minus 1.37%. It is in deflation. It is nowhere near plus 3%. It is minus 1.37%. And this is the most important of the three measurements, as I say each month, because commodities are the purest, indisputable cost that worsens human living standards. Service price inflation is more ambiguous because a rise in service prices is simultaneous with wage increases for the service provider. If a haircut that used to be $10 is now $20, yes, the customer of the haircut is paying twice as much as several years ago, but the haircut provider, the barber, the hairdresser, is making more as well. It's very simultaneous. So commodity prices not having a labor component to any significant percentage, which makes them a commodity, is the more indisputable case where lower prices are good, higher prices are bad. When oil prices are high, only a small number of countries, which are usually bad actors, are making a lot of money, and the rest of the world is paying too much. When oil prices are low, the rest of the world is paying less, and the oil exporters, many of whom are bad actors, are making much less and cannot get away with as much negative behavior. So Goldman Sachs Commodity Index is minus 1.37%. Now we go to the US CPI. This is the bls.gov website, which you'll see in the description box below, along with all associated links for this video. And this is the US CPI in its most recent reading. And to take the 10-year inflation rate, we take this reading, the most recent one, 313, and the reading exactly 10 years prior, 237. The difference between the two is the 10-year amount of inflation, and then dividing that into 10th roots will tell you what the average compound annual growth rate over this 10-year period was. And right after this, I'll have a table that shows you more about that. And we can see the various windows of inflation snapshots to get a comprehensive annualization. 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 6 month, and 12 month. Yes, there was that inflation spike for about 1 year in late 2021, early 2022. That is now in the past, and how long are people going to keep whining about that? Yes, this plateau is higher than it was before, but it's still at about the 3% level. But we take the 10-year compound annual growth rate, and we shall see that in this table over here. This is the same CPI data summarized in an easy-to-understand table. The 1 month reading was 0%, so the annualized CPI gain for the last 1 month's reading was 0%. 2 months, you have to take the 6th power of that, because there are 6 intervals of 2 months each in a year, factor to annualize. The 3-month window, you have to take the 4th power to that. 6-month window, you have to take the square of that. 1 year straight is 3.3%. There are a lot of people who say only the 1 year window matters, but they only say that when it's high. When it's not high, then those people are nowhere to be found. We have seen comments by such people many times before. They don't seem to be very good at arithmetic. And then the 2-year window, to get the annualized inflation rate over that, you take the square root of it, because over 2 years there was 6.1% inflation, which means per year that's 3% a year. Over 3 years there was 15.5% inflation. That means per year that was 4.9%, the cube root of it. 5 years, 5th root, and 10 years, the one we're interested in, 10th root. In 10 years, there was 32.1% CPI inflation in the US. That is 2.8% a year. And then just for another reference, I include the entirety of the 21st century. Since January 1st, 2001, there has been 78.9% inflation, which is 2.5% a year. So this is the number we are interested in for my matrix. It is still at 2.8%. It is not at 3%. And these recent months are also below 3%. The last 3 months has annualized to 2.8%. So these little blips are receding away into the past. And only in the 3-year and 5-year window do you see that one big 2021, 2022 spike in inflation, which vanished as quickly as it arose. And even that does not move this 10-year inflation rate higher than 3%. It's still at 2.8%, even inclusive of that big spike. So we go back to my matrix. So we saw all 3 measurements: 10-year compounded growth rate of the US CPI, 10-year compounded growth rate of the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, and the 10-year US Treasury yield. And today, June 16, 2024, the results, as we saw, were 2.8% for the CPI, so still below 3%, minus 1.37% for the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index, which is still the most comprehensive index because it is worldwide and it's not riggable. There's always someone who says, well, everybody knows that inflation data is rigged. No, it is not, because the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index is comprised of freely traded commodities. I know you memorized a statement that inflation data is rigged, but this clearly proves that it isn't. Stop memorizing falsehoods just so you can feel like a victim. 10-year US Treasury yield, this is the only one that is above 3%. But since only one of these 3 is above 3%, structurally inflation is not high. In fact, the Goldman Sachs Commodity Index is continuing to show how technology has crushed the commodity complex entirely. So no, inflation is not high. I don't care what anyone says, because I have shown multiple varieties of data. And the people who want to pretend that inflation is high, they usually only give the weakest and most ridiculous of anecdotes to study why they are wrong. See this video up here in the upper right-hand corner, Kartik's Law of Inflation, where I present the 7 most common types of very, very unscientific, very emotional arguments that people give in order to pretend that inflation is high, because they have a need to believe that they are being victimized so that they can excuse themselves from personal responsibility. Now, in the final part of this video, I want to show you a chart about the velocity of money, because many people say that when that rises back up to what it was pre-COVID, then there will be high inflation, and I will show you why that is not the case. This is the velocity of money chart from the Federal Reserve, Fred. The link for this is also in the description box below. And you can see this long-term velocity of money, and yes, it has been going down over the course of quantitative easing, but what happened over here during COVID-19? So for this, we get to the shorter 10-year chart window. The amount of money printing in COVID-19 was so much that it made velocity of money fall, and it stayed low for a while. And everyone said that when it gets back to what it was pre-COVID, that will cause a huge inflationary spike. That did not happen, because now we have gotten back to just about the same level. It's now 1.36, whereas before COVID it was 1.43. So there's very little more room for this theory to manifest in. A return to this level is no more runway left for this supposed inflation spike. People are pulling out any type of rationale to justify why an inflation spike will occur, but then these are the same people who say that inflation is already high, so they are contradicting themselves there. But if you ever hear that point about velocity of money being low is the only reason inflation is not higher, and when it gets higher, then inflation will be high, well, that has already happened, and we did not see high inflation. In fact, the time we saw that one-year inflation spike was over here, perhaps in expectation of this increase, but now that is also in the past, so it is over. Velocity of money can no longer be a factor contributing to aberrantly high inflation. So this was my inflation update as well, and I hope you found this video to be informative, and it helps you cut through the false scare memes that the media wants to foist upon you. So if you like this type of content, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and thank you very much for watching.